Episode 81 of People I Know Show. Curt Carstensen joined today by Ken Thunder and Rose Thunder. Hello.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. And the title of my show is People I Know Show. And usually I know people fairly well, kind of well, a little bit. I've met them before. And with the two of you, as we start this conversation, I'd imagine sometime back in the days of the family reunions, the Clausman family reunion, my dad is I believe the first cousin to you, Rose. So back in the 90s, at some point, I probably crossed paths with you. I know we had one of those parties at my parents' place. I don't know how long ago that was, or if you were there. So I know it's likely that I crossed paths with you many years ago. But if that was the case, I was a child and it would have been brief. So it's good to meet you, I suppose, back now that we're in the year 2020.
Nice to meet you again, Curt. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, so it's happened. But so Rose, I connected with you over Facebook a few years ago, and actually we had a separate connection because apparently some of your nieces and nephews I worked with for a time. But besides that, we didn't really know each other. And then come March, the pandemic's hitting. And suddenly I felt like I was beginning to be let into your lives because, as far as I understand it, Ken, you're one of the first people to have a serious battle with COVID-19 in Minnesota. So if you can go back to March, and as the pandemic was starting, what were you thinking about? And then as you got sick, I'm curious how that all began to transpire.
When it started, it was the beginning of March, and my wife, Rose, and our younger son, we went out to Portland, Oregon, and we visited my sister, we visited my niece, then we traveled up the coast to Seattle. And right at that time, they started talking about people getting sick in some of the old folks' homes there. And we guess at that point didn't take it very seriously. By the time midway through our little mini vacation, it started to become a big, important event at the time. And when we returned home, a week after I returned home, I developed these flu-like symptoms, and it got worse throughout that remainder of the week. And by the following week, I was in the hospital and spent 25 days in the hospital, 12 days on a ventilator. I think it was more scary for Rose than it was me because I was just kind of laying there being a listless glob of goo, I guess. But the things I do remember about this, having a serious fever of 104.5, having the worst headaches that I've ever had before. This was prior to going into the hospital. Rose would call the doctor to see if I could get in, and they said, no, he's not having trouble breathing. We're not going to admit him into the hospital. This happened for that entire week from, I don't remember the exact dates, but early March, mid-March. That it was a Monday when Rose brought me in at about sunset. I remember it was getting dark. And that's the last thing I remember being in that hospital was probably giving the guy my identification card to check me into the hospital because I was having after a week, I was finally having difficulty breathing. And that's when I was admitted.
And this brings us back to the time where, from an outsider's perspective like mine, it seemed like most of the hospitals, they hadn't dealt with it much or at all. So they didn't have tests, or very many, or good ones. So you had the medical professionals, the people that you are entrusting everything with, they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants too.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, at what point in this week long of having some symptoms did you think that you might have had the coronavirus? And And what were those first days like? I know you mentioned that they said you didn't have the certain symptoms to come in, but were you pretty aware of what other people have been dealing with through news reports and thought that you had it? Or where were you at in that stage? Do you remember?
I was drastically ill, so I wasn't much help. I'm going to leave it to my wife here to kind of give you that information.
So when he started to get sick, it was more of he had like cold-like symptoms, runny nose, a little bit of cough, slight fever, and really we thought, oh, it's not a big deal. And I would say day 3 of him not feeling well is when the extreme fever, the body aches, the restlessness, he couldn't function really. He was, at that point, we had made sure he was quarantined into our bedroom. Knowing how high his symptoms were, knowing how really almost delusional he was, I was very concerned. I had called hospitals. I called his primary care physician. I called a local clinic. I must have called 3 or 4, actually 5 different places trying to get him in for a test because I wanted to know if this was for sure the coronavirus or was he going through something else. We only knew of one other person who had tested positive but had more symptoms like pneumonia and was in the hospital for a few days and came back home, nothing real serious. So at that point, we were like, oh crap, this is real. So yeah, the only time I would go in is to check on him and bring him food, and I would cover my face or whatever. We didn't know. I mean, masking wasn't really talked about yet. We didn't really know how it was transferring. And to be honest with you, when we were on vacation, we were kind of out in the woods and we were hiking and really shut down on social media, didn't really pay attention to what was going on around us. We were enjoying the outdoors. So we didn't realize that everything had really exploded while we were gone. And yeah, kind of scary.
Do you have a sense of when you likely would have been exposed to people that possibly might have spread the virus to you? What was the most likely scenarios?
We think it was probably on the airplane ride home. I noticed a lady that she did have not an N95 mask, but the little blue mask.
Disposable cloth mask.
Disposable cloth mask, and the whole time we were flying home, she was coughing nonstop. And I'm assuming that was a symptom at the time. I developed kind of the same cough that she had several days later, which in turn led to me being hospitalized.
Okay, so we'll never know for sure if it was her, but
not really.
Then she might have been very sick, and there might have been other people on the plane. Because
yes,
I'm sure
there was no testing of the contact tracing. There was none of that at all.
This is the early days of everything becoming just enough knowledge for us to have a chance at maybe knowing what's going on, but not enough to know what's going on.
Right.
And then let's move the conversation back to then at the hospital. Once you were there, what was your sense of how well that the doctors and the nurses really knew what to do with you? Had they had anyone else there yet? And like, what were those conversations like when you were brought in? And I guess also, were you tested positive that day, or how long did that take before they knew for sure?
Some of the things that I remember on the first day or two, I did not remember a lot. I remember talking to the person at the front desk, giving him my identification card. Then there was a big time lapse where I did not know anything until sometime the next morning. I was given the test at that time, that night. I kind of remember that, kind of don't remember that. That next morning, I texted Rose and said I was positive. So it was a quick turnaround. Or was it? Okay, we're going to let Rose take this. She knows more than I do about this. So
And it's only because he was so sick, he didn't understand, he didn't have any concept of time.
I did not.
So when he was brought in on Monday night, they tested him right away, and they took chest x-rays, and they ran a bunch of blood work and put him in a room. And in order to be admitted to the hospital, you have to have a diagnosis to admit. You can't just put somebody in the hospital. So initially they diagnosed him with pneumonia in order for him to be admitted. On Monday evening, he sent me a text and said, "I'm positive." And I kind of guessed that that was coming, but well, he's in the right place. He's at a hospital. He's in good hands at that point. And then Wednesday morning, I was trying to FaceTime him. He had started FaceTiming me at like at 4:00 in the morning, and he couldn't hold his phone up. He kept dropping it. It was very unsettling because I didn't know what was going on. And finally, a nurse had picked up the phone, and she had a conversation with me and said the doctor would be coming in soon. And they recalled me back via FaceTime. And the only thing I'm seeing is a gentleman in full PPE, and I could see his eyes. But he had the coat, he had the face shield, he had the mask. He was definitely in his room. And he said, "Need to tell you that we are bringing your husband to the ICU. He is going to be put on a ventilator. He will be put onto he'll be transferred to a higher level hospital," which was North Memorial Hospital.
In Robbinsdale.
We were at Maple Grove to begin with.
Okay. So you were at Maple Grove for how many days before you were transferred?
2 nights.
2 nights.
Monday night until Wednesday morning.
And already at that point, you rose and no one was allowed into the hospital as visitors? That was already in place? Okay.
No, when I brought him to the hospital, it literally was when I called them as we were driving to say I was bringing him in, giving him a heads up. He was trying to talk to me, and all I could hear was him struggling to get air. And I told him not to talk, just save your breath. And drove as fast as I could without speeding, because I knew I could get there faster than probably an ambulance coming out. And I really didn't know what to expect. And they told me at that time I could only drop him off at the door. I could not come in. So I asked him if he thought he could actually walk in the door, and he said, yeah. So I pulled up to the turnaround. He got out and he walked in, and they had a wheelchair waiting for him when he got in the door. That was the last I saw him for 23 days.
When you dropped him off, did you have any thoughts of when will I see him again? If I'll see him again, had your mind started going to that at that point?
Unfortunately, Curt, yes. I knew when I pulled away that there was a good chance I would see him again. The drive home was the hardest part.
2 days into this, 2 nights, you're transferred to, you said North Memorial Hospital?
In Robbinsdale, yep.
The Minneapolis-St. Paul Twin Cities area. Once you were there, I suppose, Rose, maybe, can you know this? Had they been dealing with any COVID cases as severe or similar to yours? What were the experiences? Because I know this is still in the days of Minnesota hadn't had much of this. There were not a lot of cases, and I just remember from that time, like, you were being one of the few. Was this all new again to the people that were helping you?
When he was admitted to the 7th floor COVID unit. And that was, there were other patients in there at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many, but I knew that there were other patients there.
And then as you were there for how long before they did the ventilator?
He was ventilated before he left Maple Grove.
Okay.
And when they ventilate him, they put him on a paralytic. so that the patients don't fight being ventilated. They make sure they're paralyzed so they don't try to pull it out.
If you can explain what that's like, Ken, I really no understanding of this, so this will be a lot of education for me. What of that, from that point forward, what do you remember? How often do you remember? Do you remember anything?
I don't remember. I don't remember much. I remember having very, very vivid dreams about some of my past relatives, some past friends who have passed on to heaven or whatever. And I spoke to a few of them. Other than that, I don't remember much until I woke up.
They believe that the dreams could be from when he was coming out of the coma, because they had to medically induce him into the coma in order for them to be able to give his body the amount of time it needed to heal.
And you said this before. How many total days was that?
He was ventilated for 12 days.
Okay. Yeah, when you mentioned the dreams, I have thoughts of my own dreams and how sometimes I take a really short nap that seems like hours. So it's probably
it very well could have been only minute times. I have no idea. The last thing I remember was probably texting her saying that I was positive. That's
okay.
probably the last thing I remember until I woke up. And I don't even know how many days I had been off of the ventilator before I realized I woke up. It might have been.
It was 2 or 3 days after they took the ventilator off where he could actually know what was happening around him. And he really had no idea how long he had been out, where he was. He thought he was still in Maple Grove because that was his last memory.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really understand how severe it was.
So now I want to turn the conversation towards you, Rose, for a bit. And as we go through this, like I can't imagine you wishing either one of your experiences on anyone. But have you talked about or come to the conclusion of whose experience is the worst in this? Can you suffering from it, from being physically in the state you're in, or Rose more mentally having to just deal with it? What's worse?
I think they're equally the same.
I agree. It really is. I'm not nearly mentally fragile about this, but my body was bad.
Mm-hmm.
My body was bad.
He ended up losing over 55 pounds while in the hospital.
In 25 days.
Rose, as this was happening, because he was out for days and days and days, describe some of your most vivid memories or days of what that was like to be you. And I know you have how many children?
We have 2 children. One is still living at home.
Okay, so for you and your children especially, and I suppose extending from there, your family and friends, like what is that like being you during those days of just complete uncertainty and thoughts of probably the worst, far more often than you want to be thinking about the worst possible scenarios?
Well, the nice part is every morning the doctors would call me and I would get an update from the doctor and they would tell me what was going on, what happened overnight, or anything else. Other than that, I would call into the nurse's station probably 4 or 5 times a day and ask the nurse, how is he doing? What is he doing? What is his temperature? What is his heart rate? What kind of oxidation level is he having? And there would be some times where they didn't want to tell me he wasn't improving. About day 3 in the ICU, he was their most critical patient. It was one nurse with him all the time. She didn't have any other patients that she was responsible for because he was so fragile. At one point, he went into acute kidney failure and had to have a stent put in to be prepared to do dialysis if that was needed. Thank God it never happened. He never had to have dialysis. But they watched his kidneys the whole time. They watched all of his organ systems. And probably about day 10 in there, the doctor said, we're going to start backing off on the oxygen pressure to see what his lungs can handle and what he is capable of doing. And they said this will be a very slow and gradual process to see if he can do this. I don't know what his lowest oxidation level was during that time. You kind of stop asking some of the questions because nothing's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can think of is he's just getting worse. I had a really good friend encourage me to start his Caring Bridge site. And that was a great way for me to communicate what was going on. I had people calling and texting, and some people show up. At that point, as soon as he was diagnosed with COVID-19, the Minnesota Department of Health called me, and we were put on a 14-day quarantine lockdown in our house. Not like we were going anywhere anyway, but we locked her down. And the time that he went into the ICU was the same day that distance learning started for our son.
And I suppose because of the lack of testing back then, you don't know whether or not you would have tested positive at that time, or have you been tested for antibodies or anything since then, or did you get tested at that time?
I waited until a few weeks before returning to work before I went to get tested for the antibody. Because I was non-symptomatic, my symptoms were very different. While he was still home, I had a massive headache, but I was sleeping in the spare bedroom, so I thought maybe that was from the pillow. I thought maybe I was just not sleeping well in a different bed. So, and also not knowing what was going to happen. The state had been shut down. Just so much stuff was going on. So to me, a headache wasn't out of the question of what else could be happening. The day he was put into the ICU, I lost my sense of taste and smell. That was not on the list of criteria. So again, I thought that was stress. Mm-hmm. And didn't really think anything of it. So I did wait, and I went back for the antibody test just out of curiosity, and I did test positive.
And what about the son that lives at home?
He did not go in to get tested. He didn't have any symptoms of anything. His bedroom is actually downstairs, and as soon as Ken got sick, he decided he would just stay downstairs. So we didn't have a whole lot of contact. Not that I deserted my son. He just chose that he would come up for meals and then go, okay, gotta go. And spent the time in our house, but away from us.
Away from you.
Away from me. Well, you were gone.
Yeah.
You said people were calling, texting, messaging, occasionally coming over. Was that a helpful thing, or was it overwhelming, somewhere in between?
For some of it, it was helpful because I did need to have an outlet. I did need to have people to talk to. I had a very good friend who called me every day, sometimes 2-3 times a day. I would call her and give her the update and just cry or have my moment to freak out. People dropped off food knowing we couldn't leave our house, which was unsolicited and unplanned, and that was beautiful. People next door neighbor said, hey, I'm running to the store, do you need anything? And I'm like, yeah, milk and eggs and bread, basics. And not like we were really eating much because we weren't really hungry. We were more a nervous wreck than anything. So, yeah, the community definitely pitched in and helped us out when we really didn't expect it.
As Ken was waking up, as you were waking up, do you feel like you're out of the woods at that point? Like you're definitely going to survive, or maybe Rose's perspective, what was the worst over, or was there still huge uncertainty?
Go ahead, I'll let you start on this.
I think the day that they were able to take the ventilator off was probably the happiest day of my one of the happiest days of my life. And I remember calling the kids right away and telling them that he successfully came off of it, and that he was breathing on his own with just oxygen and not a ventilator. That was so relieving. And I'll just share one experience that I'll never forget is I called my parents. And I wanted to tell them right away because I had been in touch with them. They called me every day to make sure how we were and what was going on. And when I told my dad, he had answered the phone, I told him that Ken came off the ventilator. There was silence. And I thought we got disconnected. And I'm like, Dad, are you still there? And he said, yeah, this is what we've been praying for. And he was crying. When you feel that kind of love from others around, you know you're not walking that journey alone. Mm-hmm. And that to me was such a relief that he was still so out of it with all of the medication, was still coming out of a coma, that I couldn't really have a conversation with him for a few days. The nurses were great. They were so awesome. I asked him to put music on because he loves listening to having music on. So while he was in the coma, he had music playing. I asked him if they would put their hands on his back. He was one of the first ones that was laid prone at North Memorial on his stomach because every morning the ICU COVID doctors from around the metro area would do a conference call and ask, what's working? What are you seeing? What's happening? Do you have any empty beds? The doctor told me they talk every day to see what was working. And he said, they're having success with patients laying on their stomach. So we've put him on his stomach now. And I think that was probably, I don't know, day 2 that he was there, that's how soon. Now every patient goes on to their stomach automatically. I guess it's easier on the lungs. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what medications he was on. I really didn't care, just as long as whatever they were putting him on was working.
So this is back in March and April when a lot of this was new. With what you've learned now, is there anything in particular, Ken, that made you more susceptible to this? Is that something we'll never know?
I don't think we'll ever know. They're learning stuff every day. People always ask me the question, well, if you've got it, you probably can't get it yet. And the doctors don't even know if that's true or not yet, because apparently there have been several people that have gotten it twice. So I'm potentially still not out of the woods, I guess you want to say.
I think you're probably asking too, Curt, about underlying conditions which would make him more susceptible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a part of it. Have you had health concerns that might have been involved with what happened to you and being so serious?
I have type 2 diabetes, and clinically I was obese, but I'm just a very large guy, And I think it's just because I was so heavy. They say the obesity factor is a big, huge factor, and the diabetes is a factor.
He's lost a lot of weight, so he's doing better with that.
Not the way you want to lose weight, but I suppose
Oh, that's for sure.
if it turns to some aspects of your life becoming healthier than they were, I guess you can find some silver linings in anything. So I want to know more about the recovery then and what you've been dealing with. It's been 3 months, about maybe more, since you've been out of the hospital.
Came home on April 15th.
Okay,
And
so
it's what?
And this is
July 24th, so a little over 3 months.
if you can take me through the early days of being at home and what that was like to how your life is now. What are some of the big improvements that you've experienced from the 3+ months?
I want to backtrack to when I was still in the hospital.
Okay.
Eventually, they had me do physical therapy, and my physical therapy guy, the first day he said, well, he just walked in, we're going to do physical therapy today. I'm like, okay, let's do that. And I am still very weak. He said, the only thing we're going to do today is we're just going to have you stand up. And I'm thinking to myself, that shouldn't be too hard. Him and his assistant were standing next to me. I could not go from laying down to a sitting up position. I didn't have enough strength to even sit up. And when I tried to stand up, I almost immediately fell on the ground. I mean, that's how weak I was after these maybe 15 days or whatever. I still don't know what day I woke up after being off the ventilator. That was the first big reality with my strength. And noticing my hands and my arms, those first couple days being in the hospital, that my hands were very yellow. I think I was jaundiced because of not being able to go they had me on a catheter, but still, I think there was some jaundice in me. It seemed like every 4 hours they would come in and take my temperature, do all the normal, they gave me insulin in there, even though I didn't need it. They just wanted to make sure my blood sugar stayed normal. I couldn't eat very much. I mean, my food intake consisted of basically pudding, applesauce, milk, a lot of fruit like berries. Go ahead.
And the reason they kept him on that soft food diet is when you've had a ventilator put down your throat, it does irritate the throat. So he had to relearn to swallow, because you don't swallow when a ventilator is down your throat.
And then transitioning, I guess, is there more from the hospital that really?
I think that's probably the gist of it. I mean, just going through the daily routine of every 4 hours, the nurses would come in, or the nurse's assistant would come in. They take my blood pressure, my temperature, and every day I'm just thinking, is tomorrow going to be the day I go? Tomorrow going to be, and then that was the first week I was in the hospital. Eventually I made it to my own room. And I think it was in my room for 10 days-ish, I guess.
About 3 days.
Oh, it had to be longer than that.
No, I don't know. I don't remember.
Whatever. Just looking at an end date of wanting to go home. Is this going to be the day? Is this going to be the day? Finally, the doctor came in one day and he said, we're going to send you home tomorrow. And I was overjoyed. Still had no strength. When they wheeled me out, the nurses were standing there cheering that I made it.
He was the first patient at North Memorial who successfully came off a ventilator for COVID.
There was probably some families that were going through the same thing that didn't come out of it. Like,
Correct.
how rare was that? Being the first one, was it like astonishing to them that they'd finally gotten through this and kept someone alive?
I think it gave all the nursing staff and all the hospital staff hope, because all they had seen so far was a lot of unsuccessful patients. And they were the heroes. They're the ones that really helped and made the journey easier for me by always talking to me, by always answering my questions. And they were so joyful when he was able to leave the ICU and they knew he had come home.
Do you know why the day that they decided you could go home was the day? Was anything special happening or any big advancements?
My temperature was staying normal. My temperature had been, I guess, 3 days or 4 days in a row that my temperature wasn't elevated up to 99, over 99. I guess that was the key indicator. And me being on lower levels of oxygen flowing through me while I was breathing, they were able to lower it to a safe enough point where I could actually survive out in the world.
When he did come home, he came home with oxygen, an oxygen tank for traveling, an oxygen machine was set up in our house, and he had a walker. He wasn't strong enough to walk from the bed to the bathroom on his own. He needed help.
Coming home, especially in those early days and up until now, has it been a steady trend of improving, or have there been setbacks along the way?
There has not been one setback. It's been an improvement on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So from then until now, name off a couple of the most drastic changes of what you were dealing with in April compared to what you're just no longer dealing with anymore. Where's a big, they like make a huge improvement been?
Being able to walk. I could barely walk. I mean, like Rose had stated earlier, our bathroom is 9 steps, 8 steps from my bed to our toilet. I could not walk that far in the first 3 days, 2-3 days, and just the drastic improvement that I've gone that far. Not being on oxygen, they had a nurse come by that she twice a week for the first 2 weeks she came by, and her, I guess her sole purpose is to check my vitals, check my lungs, and see how they cleared up. It's been an improvement every day.
From your perspective, Rose, have you observed anything else that Ken didn't mention that you see in him or of him that makes you know that he's getting better?
The fact that he is actually up and around and moving. He was out of work for 112 days, and he just completed his 3rd week back, but he is working 3 days a week and doing 4 hours a day. He found out that first week that working 2 days in a row was a lot of work. So went to a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule instead of trying to do like a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. He's not sure when he'll be back full time. His work has been very good, very amazing, so supportive and helpful, and has really, really been there for us.
And I suppose I don't know the precise timeline, but when you were infected, did you work any in the meantime, or were you sick right away and you never worked after
I
getting?
had worked 2 days. We had gotten home on a Wednesday. I worked that Thursday and Friday. We had the weekend off, and then I didn't. Those 2 days were the last 2 days I worked.
And it seems
That would have been 11th, 12th, 13th of March. Friday the 13th. It would have been a Friday the 13th.
fortunately, I'd hope, but I guess you know better than I, that you didn't unknowingly infect anybody else in that time outside of Rose.
I don't think so. Mm-mm.
Okay.
I would hope not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no contact tracing back then either.
So right now, your life is obviously, this has been quite the year. If you can use a percentage, how close to 100% are you, or will you ever be? Like what's going to be some lasting problems you're going to have, if there's going to be some?
I'm not really sure. I think my body right now is probably 80 to 85% of what my strength was when pre COVID-19. I think, but my strength is growing every day, and the doctor doesn't know yet. We are going to do a CAT scan on my lungs to see what they actually look like. I have not done it yet, but I have to recall them back again today. And he wants to make sure my kidney function is still good. So,
is there anything in your daily routine or behavior changes that you've made that should keep you healthier in the long run? What do they suggest for you to make sure that you
stay off as much sugar as you can?
Advice for everybody, I think.
Advice for everybody.
So what's it like now? I'd imagine you're not going out more than you have to. Maybe you are a little bit. Who knows? You can explain. What's the summer of 2020 like now, coming out of the spring of 2020, which, was what it was? What are you doing to enjoy being much better than you were? Both of you. Like, what do you do together?
We've gone out on the motorcycle. And last Saturday, we went on a long motorcycle ride that was,
it was great. It was freeing. We were out just enjoying the sun and just driving, and felt like we could get out. Didn't have contact with anybody. Didn't matter. We were just having fun.
We're still in this pandemic. Unfortunately, it's not going to end anytime soon. As you're observing what's going on now in either Minnesota or the United States, or I guess globally, I don't know how closely you're paying attention to what's all happening. When you're talking to friends or people you come across, what's like your main message that you're trying to convey? And I see some of your social media posts as well, Rose. Like, what do you want people to know? You've been through this. What do you want people to know?
If you really care about somebody else, do the best you can to help protect that other person. And if that means social distancing, wearing a mask, keeping away from people, you don't know what the person next to you is battling. We have a very good friend who is type 1 diabetic. She looks like the picture of health. She also knows that she is on that endangered list. You wouldn't know that if you just saw her in a grocery store. People have, and I work with some cancer patients. They're scared because they know their immune systems are low just because they're going through chemotherapy or whatever. When you don't know what the person next to you is dealing with, the best you can do is try to protect them and suck it up. It's not about you.
Do you try to avoid social media, or because I know it can be tough? I don't know who's all on your friends list and how the algorithm works on your Facebook and what pops up, but there are people that certainly downplay the significance of this. And on a global scale, perhaps there's an argument there. I don't know, but you've experienced, I guess, the second worst way of experience. Worst would be not surviving it, I suppose.
Yep.
You came as close to that as possible, and now you're both telling that story. So when you come across people in real life or social media or on the phone who downplay this in some way, do they do that to you? What's that like, having been through what you've been through?
Social media for me has really been a negative effect. I have removed social media from my phone, so if I'm going to be on it, I have to actually make an attempt to sit at a computer to log on. I have been unfriended and followed, and I have done the same to others because I can't continue to see it for my own mental sake. People who don't take it serious, who don't think that this is a scientific
Journey that we're on.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to see people who think that this for some reason is not going to affect them, especially because we were of the same mindset. We did not think that this would affect us. Both of us we thought, had a strong immune system. You don't know how you're going to react. So I just want people to be safe.
And even for you, Rose, you obviously didn't end up in the hospital, anything as severe as what Ken, as you went through. But the symptoms that you had, not knowing all of them were symptoms of COVID-19 at the time, those physical symptoms that you went through, how does that compare to other times you've been sick? Was it pretty bad? Is it okay? Like, would you want to go through that again?
For me, no, it wasn't even bad. It wasn't bad. I would not have known if we were not in COVID time. I would not have known that that's what I probably had.
So it can be, some people, it seems like, get no symptoms. You had mild enough that not a big deal, but even so, you could have spread it to someone else had you been out and about at that time.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. My coworkers, so, everything shut down. Me and my coworkers went into the office and we disinfected the entire office space. Was I contagious then? Maybe. Did I give it to them? Maybe. Neither one of them got sick. Neither one of them has gone to do an antibody test either yet, but they don't know. So I don't know. Do you want to test your body to see if you're able to handle it? Are you willing to take that risk?
Yeah, that's the challenge here, I think, for everyone that takes it seriously. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle where I definitely take it seriously. If I'm out, I'm wearing a mask. I've been back to work where I'm wearing a mask all the time. And it's kind of like, okay, I haven't gotten it yet. I know there's a chance at some point that I'll get it. Mm-hmm. I do get it. Well, I know that I have it. I'm somewhere in this space where I don't want to completely stop living life and put myself in a state where I'm not enjoying life at all, because I think some people have gone there and for their own safety, they might have to, but I don't know that that's good either. There's got to find outlets where you can do something safely, enjoy it, and make most of this strange 2020 year that might turn into a strange 2021. And who knows, 2022, we don't know.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Exactly.
I have a segment that I like to end every episode with, my personal growth segment. And obviously you've been through a lot, both of you. So maybe you can take this each individually or come together on something that you've talked about. But as you've gone through this, is there a personal growth lesson that you'll take forward, want to share with the world, that you've learned and are kind of putting into your life now, if you're living differently in any way because of what you've been through?
Again, I'm going to always refer to her because she's more eloquent than I am.
To me, live each day like it's your last, because you don't know if and it might not be COVID, Might be a car accident, might be cancer. You don't know. So appreciate the ones that are with you. Tell them you love them, and just be kind.
Is there anything that you'd have to add?
No, I think I kind of live the same way. Treat others as you want to be treated. Be respectful. I like to tell my story to people who don't think it's a big deal, and it kind of blows them away. And hopefully, if I can change one person's thinking from this thing not being anything to at least questioning it, I think it's a positive day.
And that's a part of the purpose of this conversation, to share your story, because besides the two of you and watching from afar on Facebook, I have come across a few people that I've had on my podcast previously that have told me they've had it, and a few others lately. Like it's coming around. I think Minnesota is still a state that hasn't seen it as extreme as some other states with the cases, and I think we have a long ways to go on this. But once we're through it, assuming we're through it, and life is somewhere nearer what we used to think of as normal, having escaped death through this and gone through this, do you see yourselves living the next decades differently in some way than maybe you were thinking? Is there any plans for the future kind of going through your mind of, okay, we went through this, we need to enjoy something that we've thought about doing, we're doing it? Is there anything like that that's come about that you're sure you're going to make even more of your life than you thought you would?
He'll retire, and when he is eligible for retirement, and not work a day longer.
So is that something that you weren't really thinking of so certainly before?
It was a very, very outside thought. Now I think about it often. I think about the fact that I'm still here living, that I can retire and not put my wife through and my family through a funeral and all of that things. And it's a blessing to be alive.
And I think that goes into your living each day to its fullest, where
Yep.
we work hard our whole lives as much as we need to take care of what we need. But when we don't have to do that anymore, there's probably better ways to spend our days, knowing that at some point
sure.
you might be in a hospital for far too long than you'd ever want to be, and might never get out of there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with me today, Ken and Rose. If you have any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Just be kind to each other. Everybody's fighting some battle, and you don't know what it is.
And thank you for putting these podcasts out there. It's a great way for people to learn.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it, and happy to connect with you over Zoom today. And I look forward to, at some point in the future, a real life connection for the first time in probably 2 decades.
For sure.
That'd be great.